well, good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We're going to be talking specifically about building community, specifically social presence and assessment in the online creative writing classroom. A lot of this can be applicable to any type of online classroom environment, but we're going to be specifically applying this to teaching creative writing online. Okay, and so before we really get started, just make sure that you've removed distractions and get sort of focused for the evening. Make sure you shut your door, put a do not disturb sign on it. I had to toss my kitten out of the room, so do whatever you need to do to spend the next few minutes discussing this topic with us. Okay, so first I do want to make sure that we're all good with our technology. You should be seeing the words technology diagnostics up at the top. Can you give me a smiley face if you can see that, if that's showing up for you? Thank you, guys. And everyone can hear me okay. Can you give me a smiley face on that too if the audio is working for you? Okay. And if you didn't already do an audio setup for yourself, please take a second and do that. Okay, but welcome to session 3. This is our last session of this mini term of the semester. It's Saturday, February 21st, and we're going to be talking about a little bit less of the mixed modal learning and more just the online learning and ways in which we can improve that. So welcome to those of you who are here live this evening, and welcome to anyone watching this virtually. Thanks for coming and thanks for watching. Okay, so what are we going to be going over tonight? Ideally, by the end of this session, you should be able to do a couple of things. First, you should be able to design solutions for building community, specifically in an online creative writing course. You should be able to explain the unique assessment methods used in this type of course. And then you should also be able to prescribe methods for ensuring academic honesty amongst participants in this type of course. Okay, so I want to have us discuss a little bit, just to hop on the mics and chat a little bit. What are some social differences that you might encounter in a face-to-face versus an online course? And this doesn't have to specifically be creative writing, but any type of subject matter, and specifically the social dimension. How do you see those differing if you're seeing each other in person all the time versus just online?
I can go. I think when you do an online course, you don't necessarily get to build the relationship that you would in a face-to-face course. I mean, we see each other's pictures and photos, but until you meet that person in person, I think sometimes you can lack a connection to those people.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
I kind of agree with my face. Also, with face-to-face, whenever I first walk into a face-to-face classroom, I immediately am able to smile at the teacher and greet the students and start talking with the students. Whereas online, sometimes I feel like, okay, I'm just going to sit back and watch what everybody else does, and then I'll try to participate. So I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, so that extra layer of seeing each other in person and being able to have those little nonverbal and verbal communication with smiling and saying hi leads you to participate a little bit earlier and maybe more often. Is that maybe a fair assessment?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so keep those differences in mind, especially as we talk about what that means for the teaching of writing and how the social dimension may be, particularly important when you're teaching this subject matter. Okay. So let's discuss that a little bit more. So first I want to talk specifically about the concept of transactional distance. This is the idea that there is a distance created amongst students and students with each other, and then also student to instructor. So this is an illustration from the Steinman article, Educational Experiences in the Online Student, and how there is a disconnect there created by that distance. So you're not seeing each other in person every day. You're not talking verbally every day. People are perhaps static pictures or at least a name on a screen, and you're not really making that connectivity. You're not as engaged perhaps. So what does that mean? How can we ameliorate that? Students don't feel a sense of community because they feel that distance. Okay, so how can we resolve that? One idea that Rovi brings up in the article, Building a Sense of Community at a Distance, is that there's possible solutions like breaking people into smaller groups to facilitate a stronger sense of community. And even if that sense of community is just within a smaller subset of the students in the larger class, that's still going to cause you to be a little bit more engaged. Also, using voice and video technology can help allow students to hear each other's tone of voice when discussing the material. So that extra layer of the verbal dimension, even if you don't also have the video dimension, can just help people sort of get where each other is coming from a little bit. And here as an example, we've got on the right side of our screen here, this is an example of using like something similar to Google Hangout to have a small group discussion. So you can basically have a virtual study group that just meets through some other type of technology. In her video webinar, Michelle Pekoski-Brock talks about humanizing your online class using voice and video. She uses things like YouTube and VoiceThread. She'll record little videos for her students. So she's trying to bridge that transactional distance by using different delivery modes and by herself modeling them as the instructor for her own students. She's not only demonstrating how to use the technology, but she's trying to make sure that students see her not just as a voice on the, or a name on the screen or a picture. She's actually showing them herself moving and talking and interacting. These mixed modes of presenting material can help both people learn material in different ways while simultaneously building that sense of community. So students are getting to know each other and their instructor not only through their asynchronous writing, but also through audio and video, or one or the other or combined. And then they get a better sense of who each other are as people too. Okay, so let's discuss again a little bit and maybe just use the text chat this time. So think about how can humanizing the online course enhance each dimension of the idea of the community of inquiry, or the COI. So maybe let's first think about social presence. So what's one way that doing these efforts to humanize the online course can help enhance social presence? Okay, so Lindsay's saying building relationships with group mates. Excellent. Excellent. Anything else to add there? Having a relationship with the teacher as well. Excellent. Yeah, exactly. So we're just using multiple modes of discourse to make everyone feel like they get to know each other a little bit better. What about the cognitive presence? And that's a little bit harder. So the cognitive presence, we're looking at enhancing the goals and direction of the course. So what does it do to the course material, the goals and the direction of the course, if we enhance the human factor? Makes it easier to learn. Okay. Okay. Yeah, and basically one other effect of using multiple means of creating extra social presence is that you're also reinforcing content by presenting it in multiple ways. So if you're using a voice chat to discuss a topic, and then you're also using message boards to discuss the same topic, you're actually giving your students you know, kind of the same material. You're giving them repetition without it feeling like repetition. Okay, so then finally the teaching presence. So this is where we've got the facilitator using their interaction to put forward the goals and direction of the course. So how would using these extra modes of communication help with teaching presence? Okay, to feel like the teacher is invested in your learning and success. Yeah, so if you're able to actually see and interact with the teacher a little bit more, or hear and interact with the teacher a little bit more, it makes it feel like they are facilitating perhaps a little bit more closely. So let's just sort of review that a little bit. We've got multiple modes of discourse going on. We've got written, audio, and visual. Those multiple delivery modes means reinforcing the course content, and then the instructor perhaps modeling those modes of discourse helps make us feel like the instructor is a little bit more invested in the course. Moving on a little bit to the topic of assessment. So assessment is where we're actually determining if the students are mastering the material. Okay, and so what assessment does in the sense of the community inquiry, it ensures that there's still course rigor, it ensures that it's in alignment with the COI, and it determines the mastery of the material. So the role of assessment and evaluation is vital to ensure that students are actually grasping the material and that the method of delivery is appropriately rigorous and takes into account the COI theoretical framework. If you notice that students are doing poorly on one type of metric that you're giving them, it may be that that particular means of assessment is not necessarily appropriate to your delivery method. In creative writing instruction, assessment is often done through writing. So a lot of the things that you hear about assessment in terms of testing in an online course are not maybe as relevant for writing, especially creative writing. Can anybody hop on the mic and tell me why that might be?
Sure. For creative writing, you're actually doing more writing, whereas in another type of class, you could do more like testing. With creative writing, you would do more like portfolio and maybe essay writing if you had to do like a test. But for other classes, you could do essay writing, but not really for the assessment.
That is perfect, Sarah. Yes, exactly. So if you're teaching something where it's a little bit more objective and critical thinking based almost completely, doing these types of tests that are modeled specifically for an online environment, it's not really that relevant. In creative writing, we mostly do, like you said, writing, portfolios. You might do some self-assessment, but it's not really, you're sort of assessing how the student is growing as a writer and thinking about their writing. You're not really growing, looking at how they're growing with, specific factual knowledge. Okay? So still, though, there is still the worry about academic dishonesty. So let's discuss a little bit. We can hop on the mic or use the text chat, either one that you want to do. How are students committing academic dishonesty online? So we've got this illustration here of somebody with a crib sheet bringing notes into a test. It's not really necessarily what's happening, but why is there a concern about cheating in online classes?
Well, for like creative writing, sometimes students might be doing plagiarism, like they might be taking a quote from Charles Dickinson or something like that and not citing the source. So there's that sort of academic dishonesty.
Excellent, yeah. So you're not physically seeing the students in your class doing the writing, so you don't know who's doing that writing, okay? Any other ways people can be cheating online?
Outside of a creative writing course, they can obviously, if the exams or quizzes are taken outside of a proctored environment, they could try to take them together, look at each other's answers, sit side by side, things like that. But that's more for, like if you're doing like an MCQ exam or something like that.
Sure.
Creative writing kind of limits that, but that can happen in a regular class environment.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's worry about where are they taking the tests? Are they sitting together? Even though we're talking about maybe losing a certain sense of community, you can still coordinate enough together to say we're all going to meet in that lab and take the test at that time and share notes and share answers, etc. So there is that fear of what are they doing when they're taking the test, or what are they doing when they're doing the assessment? Also, another worry that came up in a lot of the literature is how do you know that's the person signed up for the class? So if you want to get really enterprising about this, you could actually hire someone to take a class for you. You could pay someone to do your test for you. And there are sadly companies that will gladly take your money and do that for you. So there's a lot of these ways that when the instructor is not literally right there physically, you're not quite sure what's going on with who's taking the class, who's taking the assessments, etc. So those are some concerns. Now, curbing it in an online course, students might do things like looking up answers during an exam that aren't designed to be open book, having others take exams for them, buying papers. A lot of this can be prevented by making all tests open note or open book, but timing them so that, yeah, you're allowed to look at all your material, so the student gets the sense of, I don't need to necessarily cram for that, but by putting a limit on the time that you're allowed, you still have to have prepared a little bit. You still have to be a little bit focused and know at least where to obtain that information in the textbook. So that could be helpful. When you use writing-based assessments, running them through something like Turnitin.com, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. Turnitin.com is just one example of a plagiarism detector to determine whether, if the student was copying things from Charles Dickens or something, or just students copying things from each other. It will even check a database of every other student paper that's been uploaded to Turnitin.com. So that's something that can be used. Or, you can take the extra measure of having students use webcams, screen sharing software, so that when they take an exam, that the instructor is actually monitoring them, even if it's not in real time. So there is that. But for the purposes specifically of creative writing, using something like Turnitin could be really the main thing that you need. This is also a discipline where it's opt-in. So for the most part, it's not a required course. So students taking it may be a little bit less inclined to commit plagiarism due to the fact that it's either an elective or it's an opt-in, it's their major. So there may be less of a temptation to do that. But still, using a plagiarism detector would not be a bad idea at all. Okay, so to kind of summarize a couple of these points before we go into a little bit more activities, thinking of these three areas of applying this really directly to creative writing. So talking about community assessment and academic dishonesty. For creative writing instruction, a sense of community is really important to ensure that a level of trust is being built amongst the students. So doing things like peer review and sharing your artistic output, it can be scary. So making sure that the students actually feel really comfortable with each other. That's why that community dimension is so important. Assessment, as I mentioned, it's not done through quizzes and tests. You can more easily rely on discussion boards, participating in discussions, video, audio, or typewritten chats, and then also you're being assessed primarily by your actual writing input. So the concerns over assessment and whether it's rigorous enough, it is probably going to look a lot like a traditional class. So for a regular in-person creative writing class, you're probably turning in, poetry, fiction, whatever, and that's exactly what you're going to be doing here as well. And then finally, the idea of academic dishonesty. Turnitin not only has a plagiarism detector, but it also has a peer review function, okay, and it's got stuff for the instructor to give feedback as well. It can also allow students to collaborate. So it kind of can do a lot of these things, especially for creative writing. It's a really robust tool. And when you look at these three dimensions, community assessment and worrying about academic dishonesty, I would argue that the most important element for this discipline is the building of community. And by using the mixed modes of communication and content delivery, you can build that sense of community. Okay, so let's move on to talking about a specific case study idea. You're going to be using the whiteboard tool. You'll be typing on the screen, and also you'll be searching for and finding images as directed by the case study. Okay, so going out, searching online, dragging an image from the internet onto the whiteboard page, and then also using the text tool to type on the slide itself. That's what we're going to be using as tools. And the case study itself, let me just read that for you. This is kind of long, but I'm giving you some background so you know exactly the type of student that we're. Oh, one second. It looks like Lindsay lost audio. Lindsay, maybe try to run the audio setup again, and I'm just going to read through the case study while you're working on that. Lindsay's running through the audio setup. Let me read through this. So Kevin is a 30-year-old PhD student in a creative writing and literature program. He's a TA, and he's taught literature, but he's not taught creative writing yet. Several faculty members in his department are on sabbatical, so he has to teach Introduction to Poetry Writing for the first time, but it's suddenly been switched from a face-to-face section to an online section. He took an online course as an undergraduate a decade ago, but he's had no experience with it since. His undergrad online literature course involved reading a novel every week, writing a message board post about it, and responding to 3 other students' posts. He's worried that this method does not provide a safe space for peer review, critiques, and engagement with the material. But in his spare time, he likes to use social media to keep in touch with friends. So you, in your group, you're going to be working for Kevin's Center for Teaching and Learning, and you're meeting with him to discuss how he could use 3 media tools, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Google Hangouts, to create a sense of community amongst and with his students. So you want to make sure that it's students with Kevin and then also the students amongst each other, okay? So as part of this, I'd like you to pick the media tools, just 3 of the 4, and then just write very briefly how it can create community. So when you get into your breakout room, you're actually going to be going online to search for images similar to this based on which of the 3 tools you actually want to use, okay, because you won't be using all 4. Okay, so decide which ones are your 3 preferred ones and the best tools for the job, and then you'll drag an image of that over to the media tool area here, but then in the right side, you'll just do a little quick write-up of how that can create community. Does that make sense? Everybody give me a little smiley face if that makes sense. So why don't you go ahead to your breakout room. I'll give you about 5 minutes, but get done what you can in that time period. I'll send you a little message when it's time to come back. Okay, welcome back everybody. Thank you. I'm going to bring up your slide. Okay, so does somebody want to volunteer to discuss which items you chose and why?
I will.
Okay.
So we chose Facebook as one of them, and we figured like the class could have a Facebook group, and it could be a means for class discussion, just interacting with their classmates in general. Maybe you can set up study sessions that way and different things. We also, like Google Hangout, that would be a great way to do like a group study session, like through a video session, like as you're doing things,
Okay.
or any other group interaction. And then Twitter, there are other things besides Twitter that where you can, I don't know if actually on Twitter you can do it, but you can have closed Twitter feeds. There's a thing called Today's Meet, and we've actually used it in the School of Medicine, and it's a closed feed, and then they can have it during class, and so you can have people chime in, and they can do it anonymously if they want, and it can be used during class discussion. And it's also a way where students and teacher could check in with like their classmates, with the teacher about their writing progress and how things are going.
Wonderful, thank you. And what's the product called that you use in School of Medicine?
It's called todaysmeet.com.
Okay.
And it's just a Twitter feed. You set it up for, as you know, you open up a room basically, and you get a specialized link, and you send that out to the students, and then they log in and they choose their name, and then it's just used during the window of time that you've selected. So you could have it open for just a couple hours, you could have it open for weeks, but then the students can look at it. So we've used it in some things where, you know, just to get interaction with students in a different format.
Oh, very cool. I'm making a note of that. That's great. I've used something similar that's a grad student in the College of Business created called Edify, but it's all completely anonymous and you can't choose nicknames or things. So that's interesting. I may test that out. So to kind of summarize what we talked about today, so we looked at multiple communication methods and how that can build community in an online course. Assessment in the form of writing itself ensures that students are mastering material and the course is well aligned with the COI framework. And then also academic dishonesty can be curtailed through the use of plagiarism detection services and software. So just some references used today. And then finally, does anybody have any questions? Okay, well, I think everyone knows how to reach me if you do. Thank you so much for coming this evening. I appreciate it very much, and you guys have a wonderful evening.